Well, hey. This is the September tape being brought to you live once again on top of Mount Shasta. And today we're going to talk about, well, this is a unique subject. It's called depression. And even though it may not be the most positive thing, I'd like to talk about it today. I find that usually we're used to hearing up tapes, very popular, very happening stuff, like the August one. But sometimes, we're besieged with things that aren't so pleasant. And so I'm going to talk about one of those things, depression, what it is, what it's about, how it works, and what we can do as a personality to combat it. Now, I've observed that there are different forms of depression. Some depression is based on something not going right, for instance, in your business or in your life or in your dealings. And so we get into this, whoa kind of a thing. We have a little heavier state of depressions. That's when we don't think we can make it. Like, what's the point in life? What's the point in living? What's the point in any of it? And this is a heavier, to say the least, form of depression. Then we have the one where we're sort of in a limbo, where it's not even a depression. It's beyond depression. We're not happy, we're not sad, we're not up, we're not down. And yet we're concerned because even though we have no emotions per se, our concern is in the fact that we don't have any emotions and that maybe we should be doing something. So I think I've got 3 states of depression listed here that we'll kind of deal with. Now, I'm taking depression because as a personality, I've noticed that I've been kind of going through that for a little bit of time there. And hey, the stuff that I teach and talk about is real stuff. And so this is what I do for these different things. Besides the first type of depression that, you're not quite clear with your job or you're not quite clear with anything. But it's not really bumming you out totally. For myself, I've been experiencing all 3 types. And yet, even though Dennis is experiencing different formats within depression and stuff, I've observed that the higher self is observing the depression and going, well, I see that you're experiencing this, I see that you're experiencing that. As a divine state of consciousness, however, we're still letting you know that all is okay, even though you may totally feel that you're in the pits, you're deserted, even by those who totally love you, because you can really get yourself wrapped up in the illusion. And so I've noticed that when you are really locked into your godness, even though depression sort of sneaks in, sort of like even on this tape, I'm happy, I'm carefree, things are fine, and yet as the personality, Dennis is still dealing with, oh, wow, what is the point? I'm doing everything right, things are going my way, and yet things aren't going my way, and I can feel very crappy, but hey, the higher self is on it. It's saying, you know what, this is just one of those things in evolution in time. It's a growing space. You must look at it and accept it for what it is. To rag out, which we have a tendency to do, really doesn't serve us. Other than seeing that this state is something that we are not really comfortable with, and it is something that we are longing to get rid of. Now, as I observe the different states of depression that there are and how they fit into life, I've also noticed that sometimes states of depression or states of just kind of looking around and wondering, come over us even if the things in our world are going good for us. I've noticed that within my life I've had states of depression where everything in the universe was going well for me. I had money in the bank, relationships were fine, the parent scenario was fine, rent was paid, driving a new car, and still a state of depression would come on. And I began to look at all of these different states over all of the years, thinking to myself, well, what is depression really? How does it actually come up? What sets us off? That creates different scenarios or different problems or different things that, that can throw us off. As I look at all of these things, I realize to myself that regardless what form of depression or what state you are in, going to the divine is the key. Of course, with anything, going to the divine is the key. In the divine, we find that even though the physical unit is in depression, we can override the essence of it. We can be happy even if it's forced. We can be accommodating even if it's forced. I also notice that when we are forcing mellowness within the depression, we see that there is a basic difference within the chemistry of the body somehow. Yes, we can override the depression. Yes, we can force joy on ourselves. And yet, there's something in the physical body that is growing from the induced state of feeling not so good. I guess to really explain depression and all of that takes more than just a few words than saying you're off center or you're not in harmony. It takes more than that. It's there's a lot going on within the actual structure of the human being. We perceive so much of ourselves in the state of depression that we don't sometimes like what we see, and we're trying to get rid of it even when we don't know what it is that we're looking at. Sometimes there are cycles on the planet and we just automatically go into depression, and that's pretty much just it. Depression, and I hope I'm not depressing you. Depression is a biochemical effect that has the ability to give us an illusion that takes us out of our divinity. I've observed that sometimes different states of depression are caused by medicines that some people take. And then I discover that in order to get out of that state, they induce other chemicals or medicine in order to get out of the state. I believe that within us, we each have the chemical that can take us out of depression at any time, regardless if other chemicals put us into it or not. I believe that just by being within the goodness of oneself, even though the rest of the world looks awry from our depressed state, we can still count on our goodness, or a chemical that is created through goodness, to come through and save the day. I've also noticed that sometimes forcing joy into the heart also helps. Definitely thinking about God helps. I'm only willing to accept depression for a certain length of time within myself, and then I start combating it to get rid of it, because it's not serving me. I find that sleep seems to help. I find that by eating raw vegetables and fruits seems to help. I find that turning into myself and thinking to myself, hey Dennis, you're a divine being, this will pass as all things do, begins to help. I've looked at all of the different things that I could possibly do, and I've also discovered that flushing the system with water also seems to help. I've also noticed that during depression, it seems that some of the key issues that we must deal with come up a little stronger with depression. And then I found that sometimes depression only shows up because we have compiled so much stuff within us that we just need a breather or a break. I found that depression is very helpful to us because it allows us to clear out all of the old karma that has sort of been slowing us down. And so I find depression to be a positive thing. I find that during the depressed states, I will have a tendency to not necessarily think more, but search within the intuitive factors harder to find out what is really going on with me. I also find that depression is totally unacceptable now, when it just used to be a part of life. I find that if a person is working on their divinity, depression naturally isn't as much, and it becomes much cleaner, and it's not as frequent. But I still find that depression is a great tool to use to clear up some of the old garbage that you're hanging on to. I've also found that as this garbage comes to the surface, which we have somewhat enabled ourselves to bury, I find that it's been our divinity that also put us in a depressed state to sort of bring it up for us to see what is going on. And slowly I begin to see depression as a positive avenue. Now, as I see it as a positive avenue, yes, I'm aware that there are certain chemicals in my body that are going to stay there because they were created by me, because it is never outside of yourself, to loosen up whatever stumbling blocks the divinity was coming across. Now, the divinity works very hard within us, as we in our personalities work very hard to understand the divinity, or that still silent voice that is encouraging us to be more. I've noticed that the chemicals of depression were all self-induced, but I also noticed that I chose to dump the chemical of depression when I really wanted to get through any sort of clearing. I've also known there's a little bit of drama in each of us, and during the depression, we will fight because we are survivors to find out what it is that's hassling us. As I see the depression come on, I know that there's a part inside of me that is being fatigued because something is not being true to itself within its growth. These stumbling blocks sometimes, or these avenues that need to show us what we need to grow in, will, I've noticed, not show up in other forms, sometimes other than getting into the depression state. And so as I've worked with the depression and as I've let it kind of hover over me and do its trip, I've noticed that I can grow through it as long as I'm willing to look at all of the issues that come up for me during the depression. During the depression, it looks like other people are not there to support you, which is just part of yourself not being there to support you. And you're clearing it up in the very moments by seeing that you are there for yourself, because look at how hard you're working for yourself during the depressed state. Most people just throw their hands up and just kind of walk away and stay depressed until they can beat it. That's okay, but then you sort of have to stay with the depression for a long length of time. And you know what depression is like. It stinks. Now, the quicker you can get rid of it, I think, the faster and better off you are. Each time you have a little bout with it. Now, I'm looking at depression and I'm thinking to myself, when was the last time I was depressed? Oh, probably in January or February. And I think to myself, okay, January, February, March, April, May, June, July, August, September, that's been 9 months minus a couple, 9, 8, 7. So, hey, for 7 months I've been cooking. For a week or so, even less than that, I've been going through depression. And yet, I've been managing to stay above it with the divinity going, oh, I see you get depressed for this reason. Oh, I see you're depressed for that reason. Oh, I've also noticed that you haven't been willing to say anything about these issues that have been hiding inside of you. Oh, I've also noticed that these issues that are coming up are things that you've been holding inside of yourself for a long time and not quite being able to resolve. I noticed that in the depression you are forced to resolve the issues because basically depression is just that certain part of yourself coming up that hasn't been true to itself. It knows that it needs to grow and change, and yet it's sort of been able to put some of the issues or the material on the back burner. And slowly you grow, like for 6 or 7 months, and everything's going really good, and the body says to itself, look, you've been really strong, you're really growing, you're in the divinity, you're really pushing hard. I see that you want God more than anything in the universe. I see that you are God. And so I know that you're not going to be real excited with this body, but we're going to throw you into a temporary state of depression so that you can look at the things that aren't quite feeling right with you, some of the things that just don't quite seem right with you. Now, we know that you've been practicing your divinity to such a degree that when you go into this depression, rather than doing it the old way and just rag, 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 bitch, 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 complain, complain, complain on everybody that's around you, you may take the time and try to understand what it is that's going on inside of you. Now, you may find that depression is not always dealing with money, or housing, or relationships, or food. It could be dealing with subtle, unusual things. And so sometimes the depression is unique because it has to work on you in a little different way. It's sort of like you'll go into depression, and you're in depression and you're saying to yourself, well, shit, financially I'm fine, so I don't have any money worries. I got the new car, I got the new house, I'm not having problems making my bills. Kids are fine, wife's fine, husband's fine. What is it that's going on? This is where you take the time and you look and you see and you put together what it is that isn't quite right. I mean, if you're in depression and everything's going great in your life, then all you have to do is kind of poke around, know that you're there for learning if you're in this state. I mean, this state just doesn't come on you to jerk you around. This state comes on you because it is a possibility for you to grow from. Now, when we're in the depressed state, I've observed that if we complain and go through trauma and do all sorts of these things, that we will once again repeat that fun lesson. Now, I've also noticed that repeating these fun lessons aren't that much fun. And so as I see myself making a complete fool of myself, I catch myself and I go, hey, Dennis, you're blowing it. You're looking stupid. You're going to have to redo this state of depression if you don't get a handle on it this time. See, the thing that always pulls me out of it is that I remember that I'm forever. I have no beginning and I have no end. And I know that my future, for lack of a better term, is totally perpetuated by how I am in present time. Now, while I'm in this depression, if I really choose to be a jerk and really wallow in depression and blow it out to everybody else, I know that I have to repay that scenario, because for every action there's a like and equal reaction. However, if I'm in the depression but I'm conscious, I'm paying attention, I'm saying to myself, oh, I see I'm depressed. I see that I have a tendency to want to get down on people. Now, I'm not going to stuff this. I'm going to hold my center and I'm going to be conscious of it, and I'm just going to ride through it without creating more garbage on other people. I'm going to ride through this and try not to put my attitudes on others. And the reason is simple. If I don't put my attitudes on others, then nobody's going to put their attitudes on me later on. If I stay conscious during the depression, I'm still going to be depressed somewhat, but I am growing in the knowledge that I'm learning the things from this state of depression that I will eliminate from my space, so that in the future I'm not going to have this particular format of depression. And as a matter of fact, depression per se will not be as intense. I've discovered that as I've become more realized within my expression of consciousness and with my expression of God, that I can beat states of depression that I remembered when I was younger took a lot longer to get out of. I noticed that when I'm in a depression, I'm in the struggle, and so I have to slow down, stay in present time, and look at the struggle, look at all of the things that are going on with me, and then change it. Is this the way I want to be? Well, not really. Okay, so then be conscious of that right now, so that in the future, when it comes up again, and you will recognize it when it comes up again, because you've recognized it now, it won't be as intense when it comes up again, because you are clearing most of it now. It still has the ripple effect. You know, you drop a pebble in the water, and there are ripples that come off, but the first one's bigger than the second one, and the second one's, you know, a little smaller than the first, and the third is smaller than the first and second, until it just sort of mellows out, and then sort of repeats itself. See, our thoughts are like a pebble dropping in a pond. Now, in a pond, it's not much of a problem, because there's not much surface area. But if it's an ocean and you drop a pebble, you will create ripples. After thousands and thousands of years, there are no more ripples. Now there are just big waves with ripples in them. And there's huge tide. I think the consciousness of man and all of its trips and all of its insights has sort of got its thought body into a wave. Plus or minus, right or wrong, really doesn't matter. But if it can cure the little ripples in it, the waves will disappear. If you stayed center within yourself, you will discover the divinity. Trying to find it through other people is hard, because you see it in them, but what you see in them is their divinity. Your divinity must be built and grown by you, exclusively. When the depressions come up, you just not fight them, not struggle with them. See them for what they are. Acknowledge the divinity that you have to grow through them. Get into them and then grow. I think I've given a pretty good idea on depression, how it works, why we use it. It's a very plus thing. But when it happens, because of its very word, because of its very nature, because of its very essence, we naturally take the negative side of it. I'm saying to you that, hey, depression is a growing tool. It's a part of God like everything else. See it, therefore, as a part of God. Don't let your personality turn into, nyeh. If it must, keep the divinity behind it. So as it's seeing itself go, nyeh, it will know that if it just looks at the God part of it, it may be for a day more or so, but hey, the God part will just begin to say, you know why you're so cranky here? Because you don't have this handled over here. And isn't that what's making you cranky? Hey, have you seen this over here? This is kind of making you cranky too. as we see these things that make us cranky, see the godness, see the crankiness. It's who you are, my friends. It's part of your divinity. It's that part of the divinity that shows you how to grow. Sometimes we see these negative things, we just try to get rid of them rather than see what it was in ourselves that created them so that we, through repetition, don't create them again. Depression is one of the most helpful things because it really shakes your cage and it makes you go back to the divinity. And after most of you, I'm sure, have noticed that you come out of the depression, you start feeling a whole heck of a lot better. Well, when you start feeling a whole heck of a lot better, it's nice to feel a whole heck of a lot better knowing that you solved whatever it was that you were thrown into for whatever reason that you were thrown into it. Sometimes we just go, well, I'm just depressed. I don't know why. Well, I'm just depressed. And it's a happening thing. And I don't know why I'm being depressed. There's really nothing wrong that I can tell. Now, that form of depression is sort of like a jump into limbo. The difference between depression and this state is that within this state we don't really seem to care. We don't have any emotions, if you've noticed. We're just sort of blank. We're just kind of hanging out. They're not so much depressions, and yet we choose to look at them as depressions because we don't know what to do with them, and we're in this state that we don't know quite how to handle. Why don't you just look at the state and see it for what it is? If you're not having any emotions, who cares? Now, I've noticed that during this particular state, and I hope most of you understand what I'm talking about, it's sort of like you're in this state where you just don't really care, and nothing is right, and nothing is wrong, and it just sort of goes, nothing is exciting you, yet nothing is hurting you. It feels like you're walking around through gray matter. You can see just fine, but it feels like you're in an enclosure. And it has the look of depression. We try to induce depression by saying to ourselves, hey, we should be snapping out of this. This has been going on too long. I can't figure out what it is, but I don't have anything going on for me. I should be doing something. I should be trying to accomplish something, and yet I don't feel like I'm accomplishing anything, and I'm just sort of feeling, yeah. Now, that's really not a true state of depression. It's almost a break for the human body to have a breather without emotions. It looks like depression, and yet it's not. It's just a state of change, a state of rest, a state of relaxation. I found also that sometimes depression is the prelude for a massive state of growth. I found that because in the acceleration, the heavier stuff, the garbage, the junk that you don't quite have handled yet, you must shake that off the system, and depression does that because it shakes your very essence on where you live. And so therefore what I've found is that depression is the prelude for a major transformation and growth. Because during that depression we try to put it together and shake all the stuff off that's really giving us a hard time. And that's why we went into depression, so that we could shake that stuff off, so that we could be clearer for the next acceleration and growth. The tape looks like it's running out, and rather than lose important stuff, I'll just see you on the other side. Thanks. So now, as I explain how helpful depression really is, you should get an understanding, that it's the prelude to a higher state of growth. If it's a small state of depression, it'll be a little hopper in growth. If it's a big state of depression, it'll be a big hopper in growth. Now notice, a big state of depression I didn't say was going to take longer than a little state of depression. I don't put times on it. I put intensity on it. The other state of depression that I was talking about, which doesn't actually have depression, you just don't have any emotions or feeling, is also a state that is just ready for you before self-transformation. This state, however, doesn't have to put you through trauma or anything else. It's basically allowing you to become blank. so that during this time you can absorb all sorts of stuff.